Welcome back to the Wealth Outside of Wall Street channel, where you, my friend, learn how to get your money off of Wall Street and retire in 10 years or less. Now, my friends, today I've got a 3-part video series for you that is going to be the one thing that will radically change and alter not just your perspective around money, but how fast you can get results. Here's the one thing, my friends. Today, most people are struggling. They are struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to retire. They're struggling to wonder and know if they'll ever have enough to be able to live the life that they want. And it's all because of the one misunderstanding that most people have. And we're gonna solve that misunderstanding in this video right now. So I want you to ask yourself this: what if debt could actually make you wealthy? Now, depending on your perspective around money, and especially debt, you're either taken back by that statement or you're like, I think this might be true. And I'll remember for me, when I first started learning about the conversation on the topic of debt, I was so scared of debt. Everything I had learned basically came from my man Dave Ramsey and from my dad, who taught me how to live a Dave Ramsey lifestyle, which I'm grateful for, because Dave Ramsey actually helps people who have a misunderstanding of debt. But I want you to consider, in order to build your wealth, you have to understand what debt is and how to use it as an investor to create massive wealth in a short period of time. And I'm also going to invite you to consider that it is the only way to create financial freedom in the current economy that we live in today. Consider this: debt isn't good or bad, it's just neutral. And it's actually how you, the individual, use debt that makes debt either good or bad. Unfortunately, most Americans use debt in a bad way that puts them in a proverbial trap. Someone who uses debt to go out and buy a bunch of stuff and then has to trade their future time to pay off that debt, they're falling victim to the consumer culture that we live in today. And this is the culture that traps most people with debt. Let me give you just a couple statistics on this. Today, there is over $17.3 trillion in outstanding consumer debt. Now, what this actually means, if every American in the economy today worked for 4 years straight and contributed the after-tax median income that Americans make, it would take Americans 4 years to pay off all of the debt. That doesn't mean it would take Americans 4 years of working non-stop and not putting money to anything else to pay off all of the consumer debt. In addition to that, student loan debt is the biggest income producing asset on the government's balance sheet. Your student loan debt is the biggest asset putting money in the government's bank account. Bigger than income taxes, it's the biggest asset that they actually have. Today's student loan debt is over $1.7 trillion, and the median income for a college graduate is actually going down when you consider inflation. So clearly, Dave Ramsey has a point. Debt is a very big problem, and it is the one thing that keeps most people trapped in the proverbial rat race. Most people will spend the majority of their lives working to pay for things that they've already bought and consumed and likely have already forgot about. But that doesn't mean that all debt is bad. On the other side of the debt equation, there is good debt. And this debt is the secret playbook of the rich. You see, in 1971, the rules around money and creating wealth, around saving, they changed completely. These new rules were not ever announced. It's not like some financial advisor or the president of the United States got up and said, "Hey guys, everyone, the rules are changing." No, but the rules were quietly changed behind the scenes, and the ones who saw and understood what the new rules were, they've been using debt to their strategic advantage to create massive and massive wealth. We hear all the time about this disparity between the wealthy and the poor and how big that disparity is getting. And the primary driver for that disparity is debt. The poor use debt like consumers, and the wealthy, they use debt like investors. In fact, debt has created more millionaires than almost anything else in the modern economy. But in 1971, President Nixon took our money off of the gold standard, and instead they created a new kind of money that was backed by literally nothing. If you look at money today, it literally says it's a Federal Reserve note. Now, if you're not familiar with what that term is, those are basically IOUs. The government is printing money saying that there is nothing, not a single thing standing behind those paper currency that we have other than a universal social agreement thinking that dollars represent money. When this ultimately happened, two very important trends began. First, the government began printing money at unprecedented rates. In the last 25 years alone, the average monetary supply, the increase in dollars in the economy, has been 8% on average for 25 years straight. This leads to inflation. This makes your dollars less and less valuable over time. At the same time, the government began printing more money. Americans found it harder and harder to save because their dollar was getting less and less valuable over time. This is inflation. Now, what does this have to do with you? You just got a brief history lesson, and I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on how the rules changed changed and how you now can use debt, just like the government is using debt, to your strategic advantage to create wealth. Our currency is literally debt. Our economy is funded and built on debt. And those who understand debt, they use debt strategically to win in a massive way. In order to use debt, you must follow one golden rule. Let me give you this golden rule. In order to use debt strategically as an investor, you have to know and follow the golden rule. So let's break this down one step at a time. There are 4 basic steps inside of this golden rule. Step number 1, use other people's money via bank loans and leverage. Step number 2, an asset is something that produces income, like rental property or a business. Step number 3, other people pay back the debt on your behalf via rent payments. And step number 4, profit is a surplus of cash once all debt has been paid for. You might be thinking to yourself, how does this make me wealthy? That just puts me into more debt. So the only way you get to access this playbook of money and this vast sum of resources to build your wealth is if you have an asset that you can secure that debt against. So your step number 1 is actually going out and finding an asset that you can then bring to the bank to say, hey bank, I've got this asset. Will you give me money to acquire that asset? If you get that figured out, my friends, the entire game of wealth will change. So my friends, I just opened up the doorway of possibility for you, and I want you to consider this. If you look out at every wealthy person out there that you can think of and imagine, right? No matter who they are, whether it's Elon Musk, whether it's Warren Buffett, whether it's Oprah Winfrey, whether it's Ray Dalio, whoever you want to look at out in the marketplace and say, look, those are the wealthy people. Now, all of those people have likely created their wealth in vastly different ways. They've created their wealth via business. They've created their wealth via entertainment. They've created their wealth via, social media, whatever it is. They've created their wealth in lots of different ways. But if we look at them and say, is there one thing that every wealthy person has done, whether they did it by intention or they did it by default, it's this one secret. The wealthy have one thing in common, and it's leverage. They understand how to use good debt. So here's what I want you to consider for yourself. You either have to learn how to master debt, or it's going to master you. You will either learn how to strategically use leverage to create wealth, or you will never become financially free. So my friends, debt is actually your constitutional right. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, Ryan is crazy. Debt is not my constitutional right, but it is. Here's what I want you to consider. Well, let's say that you decide to buy a rental property, and the average price that you're going to buy at is $150,000. That means there's over $2.4 million sitting in some account with your name on it, waiting for you to come access your constitutional right so you can access that $2.4 million to build your wealth and freedom. Once you understand this, the game fundamentally changes. You realize that it is impossible to save your wealth, your way to an abundant retirement, and rather than trading the next 30, 40, 50 years to find out when it's too late that debt is working against you and that inflation is destroying your retirement, why not just take an opportunity right now to check your premise? My friends, we live in this world where everyone is clinging to this idea that they can still save their way to an eventual retirement. I'm here to tell you that the wealthy, they're not just doing average things better, they're doing the exact opposite as you. Step number 1 is understanding how to use and master debt. Now, join me on the next video, because in the next video, I'm going to outline the 3 assets that you have access to that will allow you to access unlimited amounts of debt, and I'm going to give you a case study of using real estate to actually create wealth versus a 401k.